Howdy folks, I'm Mark Rutan. Welcome to Nomad Boatbuilding. Now we've been working on a project called Gannet, a glued Lapstrake plywood sailing dinghy. And I've been using this project to try and share with you some fundamental wooden boat building techniques. You can use these techniques for just about any boat building project. Now we've been doing a little deep dive into the glued Lapstrake plywood planking process. We've covered beveling the laps, cutting the gains, spiling for the planks. We've covered fitting the planks. And now we're going to install the planks. We're going to use epoxy adhesive to install these planks, and I'm going to show you how to do it in two different ways. I just want to give a shout out to two manufacturers who both donated products that went into this episode, Total Boat and West System. They're both excellent manufacturers and produce a great lineup of products. Okay, let's get a plank on. So I like using these little Dixie cups from doing my mixing in, because I don't need a big huge cup. These are good enough for getting, 2 to 3 shots in. I'll use the slow hardener just because my fast hardener is empty. My slow hardener, there's plenty of that. I'll use it. It gives me a bit of working time. Now I know I'm going to need at least 2 shots for each seam on this boat. So we'll just start with that. I always pump my resin first and then my hardener. 1, 1, 1, 1 always, because it's easy to lose count. You'd be surprised. Okay, and then we have a mixing wand on my drill here. You wouldn't want to do this for doing a wet out of fiberglass cloth where you want it to be clear, but this is great for doing anything that is just structural. Just speeds up the mixing time a lot. So for a good 30 seconds with the drill, and that gets mixed up pretty fast. We're going to need an acid brush. Alright, let's go do our wet out. These acid brushes have a bad habit of losing hair, so it's always a good idea to give them a pinch with some pliers to lock them down. I want to apply unthickened epoxy to whatever surface is most porous first. Now, I'll be the first to admit I could probably refine these next few steps a little bit and save a little bit of time. Doing a wet out on the lap here where we've beveled it, I think is really important because there's so much end grain. It's really a very porous surface. On the plank though, we just have face grain. I could probably omit this by doing a wetter, thickened coat of epoxy, and I could just roll that right on here. But I take this step because I like to apply that epoxy to the plank edge that's on the boat and not the plank that I'm about to hang, because it's just much messier to apply it to this plank and then try and handle it. Okay, now I'm going to take the rest of this, I'm going to thicken it up. I've mixed this with some wood flour to what they call sort of a jam consistency. That means it just barely holds peaks and slumps back down, so that's a great consistency for bonding. And for reference, for every shot of epoxy, and by shot I mean 1 pump of resin, 1 pump of hardener, I add about 1 heaping teaspoon of wood flour to get this sort of consistency. Wood flour is just sifted sawdust, but West System makes a wide range of different fillers. I would choose their 403 microfibers, their 405 filleting blend, or their 406 colloidal silica for this. You can mix and match those to get just the right consistency as well. Their product guide can help you choose the right one for your application. So we're just going to paint on a generous coat of this. Now especially here at the stem, I know I got a little bit of a void at the back edge here. I just didn't quite get the bevel right, so we want to make sure we fill that. So be a little more generous there. It's easier to put more on now and clean out the excess than it is to try and squeeze in more later on, if that makes any sense. So I found there's a technique I've come up with for putting it along the lap. Make sure we get some up underneath there. And that is, we take the brush and I kind of do this like rolling motion. And that sort of does a pretty good job of delivering the volume that I want. I think I might have to mix up an extra shot of epoxy here before this is done, but that's fine. I'd rather mix up too little and have to mix up 1 more shot than having too much, because too much just shortens your working time. Still, I'm going to be doing the other side as well, so if I have to mix up another shot and I only need a little bit of it, I'll use the unthickened to wet out the other plank so that it's ready to go. And the wet out coat, I got tons of time to worry about that. It's only with thickened coats that you need to worry about working fast, because they're going to kick quickly because there's more volume. Just a wet out coat, you can let it sit around for 20 minutes, 30 minutes even. So I want to make sure there's enough on here that when I put these two planks together, I'm going to get some squeeze out. Now to get the plank on here without making a mess out of this. I'm attempting to add a temporary outrigger here of sorts in order to carry one floppy end of the plank that's going to twist into place. I'm not sure if this is going to work. I just decided I would try this. Always have a rag, some alcohol on hand to clean up any bits and pieces that landed in the wrong spot. Okay, now I put this little leg over here because I know from playing around with this plank that if I try and drop it in place right away, it's going to smear all over the place. So I've got a mark on the angle's not good. Okay, that's not working. Try something different. Okay, maybe that should work. Now you always want to have a registration mark somewhere. I've got one right in the middle. That's usually the best place for it. Drop that on there. And the tail end of my plank notches into the transom. Okay, good. Swing my little keepers into place. Okay, we'll pop a few clamps on. Just tack this until I get it fitted up forward. Those can only reach so far. One of the viewers made these Brenner clamps for me. These work quite nicely. I want to give a shout out to Steve Lewis, who gifted me these Brenner clamps I'm using. He makes and sells these over on Etsy. I'll leave a link in the description. A little different than my cam clamps, but they work pretty good. Okay, so now I don't really want to clamp it any. Actually, I think I'm going to even take this one off, because when I bend the front end in, it's going to play around with this positioning a little tiny bit. So we'll get it bent in first, and then we'll come back and clamp the middle. Keep your hands clean. Okay, now up here, it's tricky to keep everything from going kablooey on you, so you need to have some clamp pads. Making some little V-block pads is probably advisable. So we'll get some of those on. This one I think we need to nestle up high. I think I'm going to hold off on mechanical fastenings until, that's exactly what I was worried about, until after it's all cured. Except for there's going to be one temporary mechanical fastening down here. at the tip of the stem. I'll just put these right in the lap where you won't see them later on. Move that a little tiny bit. Because there's so much tension up here, I think I'll use another temporary screw. Yeah, we'll do a temporary screw for now, and we'll just fill that and then nail it later on. Hopefully the nail will hide the screw, but this will all be painted, so it really doesn't matter either way. Actually, maybe I'll put one in really high, where I'm pretty positive it'll get trimmed off. Let's do that. Now, if I'm worried about this, I can always add one of my little toe clamps right on there to make sure that stays down. Looks like I need a little shim under that. That's all we need right there. Now I'm going to just make sure this is clamped nicely, fastened, and then we'll go about the business of cleaning up. So any place that doesn't need heavy clamping, I'm using these polymer nails. Now these aren't very long, they're only 5/8 long, but they allow me to do a better cleanup without the clamps in the way. So this is a little hack that I like to use for doing glued Lapstrake planking. Now, using these products costs a little bit more, but it does save some time. So what I've got here is I've got a Thixo low viscosity adhesive. It's epoxy. You can see it dribbling out. That's how low viscosity it is. And so I'm going to be using this to wet out my planking, wet out the joint. And then we've got a thickened epoxy for doing the bonding portion of the joint. So this is just to make sure that the open grain is filled and that the surface of the planking is well saturated. I'm quite confident I could probably just use the thickened epoxy for this operation, but this product exists. I am confident this is probably making for a better joint by doing a wet out with this low viscosity epoxy. And so between the two, I'm getting what I would consider a really good mechanical bond that I'm very confident in. So part of the hack here is using this low viscosity is because it dribbles out. I've come up with a neat way to use a brush to help spread it so that you can apply it more quickly. So one thing I find is I need to shorten up the hair on the brush a little bit. So just using a little metal acid brush, knock about, I don't know, 1/4 inch off the end. So once that's pushed down, that's about the width of my joint roughly. It moves a bit easier if we've shortened those up. And then I put the nozzle on, find the attitude that I want to work in. So I like holding my guns usually to the side for some reason. I don't like using them vertically. I like them to be off to one side. And so I'm going to want to apply the brush on this orientation. So what I do is I bend the brush down a little bit so that the end of the nozzle just touches the bristles. And then we use some masking tape here to tape this brush on, and it makes for a great little spreader. So this definitely speeds things up. Now the only difference between doing this and doing it the other way is the other way I would mix up some epoxy, so it saves me that mixing time, and then I spend a bunch of time brushing it on and then thickening that epoxy and then putting thickened epoxy on. So you'll see how this really goes quite a bit faster. I'm not sure how much time I save, but between the two planks, I'm sure I save half an hour. Okay, so this one's ready to go. This tube is almost empty, so I'm gonna have to get another tube. This one is about halfway done. This has done 2 planks, between the two of them, 2 planks so far. So we'll see how far I get with this one. I might have to switch out tubes. I always do the bevel first on the planking where the open end grain is, and that just gives the epoxy more time to soak in. Come on. Always takes a bit to get the epoxy running down these mixing tubes. There we go. So I always try to make sure I get the end grain wetted out. And once you get the pressure going in these tubes, it tends to dribble a fair bit, so you got to keep going, be wary of the fact that this epoxy is not going to stop coming out even though you stopped pulling the plunger on your gun. This is a self-releasing gun, but it still fights me a little bit. So I usually just do this. I work my way down, and every now and then I just do a little backstroke to make sure I'm spread nicely. There's a little bit of epoxy that's kind of splattered around here as I've been waving the gun around trying to move cameras, so it just shows you how quickly the stuff will come bleeding out. Okay, so while that's going, I will now apply some unthickened epoxy to the plank that's going to go on, hitting the stem area, obviously. And then I'm going to run to the back to the other end where it's more effective for me to paint. But the process is the same. I could probably omit this, but I've done this on every boat that I've ever built, and none of those have failed, so I don't intend to stop now. If you're liking these videos, you can support me by giving me a thumbs up, throwing me a couple of bucks or super thanks, subscribing to the channel, turning on notifications, and of course, you can join me over on Patreon. Find links in the corner or down in the description. Okay, so now I'm applying the thickened epoxy. And I've tried to come up with applicators for this nozzle as well, but I've just not come up with something that's quick and easy to make that works any good. So we just smear a bead on. Then we're going to comb it out with a spreader. Though you could probably just slam the plank right on top of this bead and be okay too, but I try to be a little more even. Okay, then you don't want to have somewhere to hang your guns while you're working because they'll keep dribbling for a little bit. Okay, now I just take a spreader. I like to use maybe about a medium comb. Might have to come back and hit this in a couple more spots, but that's fine. Make sure I got a little extra in the spots that I really need it. So now we just take this plank. I've got one nail that locates it in the center here. Now when we're rehanging a plank, especially when we're going to glue it, we want to make sure that our plank is located in the exact same position that it was as we were doing our fitting. And so for this reason, I'm just using a single finishing nail tacked through these planks so that when I come in here with a glued up plank, I can drop it down and just get that finishing nail locating us fore and aft, and that takes care of everything we need in order to get this into its finished position. The hood ends at both ends are going to locate both ends of the plank to their finished position, and so this just helps me to get in the right spot in the first place so that those all work out. Get that to drop in. And my little buttons, that one just fell off. Gotta go up forward and get the forward portion in. Stay on. Get it. Come on. Get a clamp on here. Down here at the bow, swing that in. Got a screw ready to go in. Swing our buttons into place. Now the buttons help to locate it. I just pop some clamps on. Okay, now with everything just sort of tacked into place with clamps and buttons, you nail it off. These are polymer nails I'm using. So they don't have a super strong hold. They kind of tack it in place. Check this, still got bullets, yep. These are just, they're 5/8 of an inch long, so they don't go all the way through the planking. Okay, so now I can clean up that joint. I can even pull these clamps off, and this will be done. I got to put some nails in with the stem. The transom doesn't really need it for now because there's not a lot of twist, but up here I need to get a little more hold going directly into the surface of the stem. Okay, so I just follow my other nail holes here, coming back, following the face of the stem. About there. I know I'm going to have one nail down here in the lap, so I don't worry about that. So I'm going to go up here. So there'll be a nail there. This will be my lap. So I'm going to try and space them evenly. So one, two. There we go. And then just to make sure it's holding, give them a little set. Okay, and that's it. Just take a knife, we'll clean up all the extra goo, use it on the other plank. So I'm going to go and start by wetting out the other plank, and I'll come back and clean this up so I can use the goo on that side. So a general word of caution about epoxies. if they've been sitting around for a while, after a few months or a year, epoxy resin will sometimes start to gel up. It'll get kind of granular and chunky. Now, it's not bad. All you need to do to fix that is you basically have to warm it up. So a very simple way to do that is, if it's a can of epoxy resin, you can just drop it into a bucket of water. Of course, making sure water can't get into the epoxy itself. Or in the case of these tubes, you can just put them in a bag and drop those in a bucket of hot water. Probably takes about 15 or 20 minutes for them to come back to life. Now, it's especially important with these tubes because if this stuff is thickened up, you're not going to get it through these little mixing wands. And the mixing wands are half of what makes this caulking tube epoxy worthwhile. Now, I'm using Total Boat because Total Boat has supplied these to me for free. It's very nice of them. Appreciate that. West System also makes a similar product. West System does not make a low viscosity one in a tube that I know of. Maybe in their Pro Set product line they do, but I'm not familiar with it. But they do make a thickened one called 610, which works just fine, and for all intents and purposes seems to be exactly the same as the Total Boat Thixo. This is my third pair of planks going on with this tube. So this particular tube looks like it's just about played out. Hopefully it'll make the rest of this run. So a 14-foot boat, 14 times 12, like 144, 150 feet. Lineal painting here, 3/4 of an inch wide. For reference, so how much would you need for a boat? Oh, looks like, 2 tubes of each. The thinned one being purely optional. I'd get a third one just to be safe. Feel this is just about done. Come on. Working the end of the toothpaste tube hard here. Trying to squeeze it for every last drop. Yep, that's it. That's done. And happily, that's all we needed, so that's great. Now, another important tip, if you are starting up a fresh tube of this stuff, you need to waste at least an inch or two of mixed epoxy just to make sure that you have started the mixing process evenly. Because if one comes out, the resin or the hardener comes out faster than the other at first, you could end up with an uncatalyzed mix. That happened to me once, and it was a huge pain in the butt to try and clean out the joint and re-glue it in the section where it was not mixing properly. Very worrying. So it feels to me like the savings in time is relatively significant because I'm not spending time doing more mixing. Now, I'm pretty fast at mixing. But all the little elements combined, not having to mix, using the brush applicator, using the thickened epoxy in a tube, and then also throw in my polymer nail gun, and I think I get these planks hung pretty fast. Now, not that you can really get more than one pair of planks hung in a day, because once the plank's on, you can't necessarily move on to the next because there's tension in the hood end that you can't unclamp until the epoxy's cured, so you're kind of stuck. Now, if there's anywhere you're going to screw up your bevels, it's up here in this section right here. So make sure you are fairly generous with your epoxy there. The combination of wind in the shape of the bevel plus the tension in the plank, that's the trouble spot. That's all there is to it. Alright, once again, those are all on. Plank. Here we go. Can't tell you how that one little nail, how helpful it is to get it in the right spot. Now the trick is to not wag it up and down and smear the epoxy all over the place, up forward especially. Get a few clamps on. Come on. So just want to make sure I got it sort of clamped in the middle before I finish laying it down near the ends. Now, one of the reasons for using the clamps here is just to make sure that this epoxy joint is well seated, because the nail gun I have doesn't have the power to really bring it in, because the little plastic brads are fairly short. And I'm keeping them that way because I don't want them going through the back of the planking, where they kind of have a bit of a blowout, and they make filling all those little holes a real pain. Now, the polymer nailer is nice to have, but it is not the only way to put these together. A lot of people will just put a screw in at each mold. Some people will put a batten across the whole thing and screw the batten down in several spots. That works really well too. I've done all of those things, but lately this has been working well for me. Now, finding a drill bit that fits your ring nail properly can be a bit challenging. It's easy to get ones that are undersized or oversized. And more importantly, when you drop the drill, which you will do, you're probably going to break the bit. So the best thing I suggest is you make a drill bit out of a finishing nail. Just sharpen it into like a three-sided awl. Works beautifully. Okay, now to clean that side up. So there we have two different ways of hanging a plank using epoxy. Now, we've used what I would call the traditional method, using the West System products, the 105, 205 resin and hardener, along with a thickener, and then a separate method using the Total Boat products in caulking tubes. I just want to point out that West System also makes a thickened epoxy in a caulking tube. It's called 610. However, it only comes in a single cylinder tube, just like the Thixo low viscosity epoxy. If you want a larger size tube, a double tube like the other Thixo comes in, West System does manufacture that in a different product line that they refer to as ProSet. It's intended for the professional boat building industry. Now, I've never tried that specific product, but I'm sure it's quite comparable to the Thixo. The point being is that both those caulking tube configurations are available from both manufacturers. The single tube for any old caulking gun, or the double tube, which does require a proprietary gun. Now, I've got a couple of those guns from two different manufacturers. They appear to be virtually identical, so there's some standardization in that double gun. So if you have one from Total Boat, it'll probably fit the ProSet and vice versa. If it were just me, and I'm working as a hobbyist, I wouldn't bother with the double tube, I would just get singles. If you gotta buy an extra caulking gun to be able to carry a low viscosity tube in one gun and the thickened in another, that's not a big investment. That's like 10 bucks. Anyhow, I want to thank you for watching this little deep dive into the glued Lapstrake planking process. I hope it was useful to you. I've tried to provide some good in-depth information that you can apply to any boat building project, as provided it's glued Lapstrake, of course. Now, I should say that a lot of the techniques I have presented related to glued Lapstrake planking are fully applicable to doing traditional Lapstrake planking. Virtually everything. The only difference being is that we need to be more careful with our fitting, because we don't have the benefit of putting a thickened adhesive into our joints. That said, There are a lot of people out there who do traditional Lapstrake planking and will use a thickened adhesive in there, like a flexible polyurethane or something like that. And there's some argument to be made that you could do that with epoxy too. I want to thank all my followers who support these videos over on Patreon, and if you can support me there too, I would really appreciate that. You can find links in the corner or down in the description. And I want to thank everybody else here on YouTube for liking, subscribing, and all that sort of stuff. So I hope you'll join me again on the next episode of Building Gannet, where we're going to finish off that planking by hanging the whiskey plank. That'll be fun. We'll see you next time.